It's been almost 10 years since the last single-player Fallout game was released. That's a long time to wait. I am, like many other people, getting tired of waiting. But I still have hope.
That's the spirit. Now.
So here's 7 hopes I have for the next Fallout game. The first thing I want to see is a blank character. I don't want to know who my parents are, I don't want children, and I don't want them to be the main focus of the first half of the game. I would like the option to decide who my character is and shape their past myself. Fallout 1 and 2 did this well, giving players a blank slate and a few preset characters to pick from. They weren't the main focus, just flavor. Fallout 3 and 4 kind of forced you to play as a preset character. Sure, you could choose to ignore their past, but you are still completing the game, trying to find James or Sean. It's an uncomfortable thing to be forced into that's kind of distracting and makes the game less enjoyable. They're still great games, but they could have been so much better. And it's for that reason I quite like the idea of selecting some kind of life path, be it a scavenger, a mercenary, or a survivor from before the war. But these backgrounds only serve to get the player in the right location at the right time, and isn't the MacGuffin to get the story going, nor direct the story in any significant way.
You're not my dad!
Another thing I would like to see in the next Fallout game is more voice options. A speaking protagonist is fine. It can work. I think I'm just so used to not speaking in Fallout, but if you had more options, then it could be more personal. Or if that's too much work, have a single talking protagonist, but then have the option to make them silent.
If you just stop talking. Okay.
Something else I think many people will agree with is having more playable races, including ghouls and perhaps super mutants too. The first instance of this was in Fallout Tactics with ghoul recruits you controlled, then Kane in Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, and now, 2 decades later in Fallout 76, you can play as a ghoul. So I think our chances are pretty high for playing as one in the next Fallout game. Super mutants, on the other hand, are less likely, with only one playable super mutant in the entire series, Big Betty from Fallout Extreme, and that game was cancelled. While I would like the option to play as a mutant, I don't think it would work for the game I have in mind, as the timeline wouldn't work. You need to have a genuine reason for them existing, and I don't really want to mess around with FEV, but I think it could work on a small scale, with the player being the only super mutant in the game. More playable characters, ghouls, mutants, whatever it is, I understand you need to weave this into the world to make it believable, not to mention a starting location that also allows freedom to decide your race, and I think a good trade-off could be starting inside a vault. Now I know that's been done to death, but starting inside a vault doesn't necessarily mean you came from a vault. The residents inside might have been given orders from Vault-Tec to research the effects of radiation on humans to evolve humanity into beings who can survive on the surface. That's not a unique thing, but this would allow the player to start inside a vault after being kidnapped by Vault-Tec. And then you can also decide what happens to your character while you're inside. Were you recently kidnapped and are therefore still human? Did they turn you into a ghoul? Or did Vault-Tec inject you with FEV, turning you into the first successful super mutant, or some other type of mutant? It doesn't necessarily have to be the run-of-the-mill green super mutant. As well as this, the tutorial could be you completing tests for the Vault Doctors. You're given a Pip-Boy that accurately records your condition, so we still have that, and then something goes wrong. Maybe a faction from the surface attacks and you have the option of escaping, joining them, or going your own way. It's not hard to give us this choice. Maybe the faction doesn't want a ghoul joining them, maybe they take you by force if you're a mutant, or simply let you join them if you're human. There's so many options, and all of this allows the player to have complete freedom to decide who they are, where they came from, their race, and ultimately, where they will go once they leave the vault.
Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
Now, outside the vault, we have to talk about gameplay, and I do want the next Fallout game to be offline. Not everyone enjoys online games, some players can ruin the experience, and many people just don't have the time, or they might not be free at the same time as their friends. So at the very least, you should have the option to play with friends or play with yourself.
Yeah, boy.
And where would all this be taking place, I hear you ask? Well, the thumbnail is probably a dead giveaway. That's right.
New York! Concrete jungle where dreams are made!
New York was almost the location of Fallout 4 before it changed to Boston. Before that, Obsidian was asked to remove a line in New Vegas where San Francisco was said to have been totally wiped off the map, as they wanted the Bay Area to be an option for a future game. I'm almost certain Season 2 of the show will explore that area. The next Fallout game could also be there, but I think it's better to give us something new, and New York, would be exactly that. Don't get me wrong, I like the locations we've had, and I think San Francisco is an awesome place to explore. But with each new game or story, the more confusing the lore becomes. The factions become bloated, and it doesn't matter how careful you are, there will always be people who are unhappy with changes, logical or otherwise. And that's why I feel as though we need to go somewhere else, somewhere new that we haven't yet seen. New York is a popular choice, and I can see why. There's lots of ruins to explore, huge subway tunnels, sewers, different islands, and Central Park. So many places to explore, and potential factions and creatures to fill them. I can already see Central Park being a hunting ground for survivors, or a Deathclaw hotspot. However, New York has been mentioned in the series before, and I want to go through some of those mentions and show you how the city could be a viable option. During the Great War, New York was a major target for America's enemies, resulting in it reportedly being hit by multiple nuclear weapons. The destruction and chaos was so severe that even the most hardened military members couldn't handle the situation, let alone your average person. In the immediate aftermath, surviving military commanders deemed the city lost, and other survivors spread word of New York City being a place to avoid, hearing that it was much worse off than Boston. Despite this, I can see a military commander with a group of loyal soldiers holding out on one of the islands, maybe Rikers, and over the next decade or so they become self-sufficient, creating the first post-war settlement in New York City. Although New York City's post-war status is not fully known. In Fallout 76, the Assaultron Adelaide said she attempted to find Broadway in central Manhattan sometime between the Great War and 2105, but the Big Apple had become a big crater, or at least the areas surrounding Broadway had become a big crater, meaning the rest of the city could have viable locations for survivors. Then, around the late 2280s, almost 200 years after Adelaide tried going to Broadway, the Brotherhood of Steel passed over numerous cities along the East Coast during their expedition from the Capital Wasteland to the Commonwealth, with eyewitness accounts telling of derelict skyscrapers taken over by mutants. New York is pretty much halfway between DC and Boston, so they most likely saw the city, and according to them, New York is long gone. But this doesn't mean it always was, and this gives us a window to explore New York during a more habitable time, and the only way that is possible without messing up established lore is by setting the game closer to the Great War, and I feel the earlier it is, the better. But my ideal year would be 2095, 18 years after the Great War. My reason for this is you obviously want to create your own character, and I think 18 years old is a good starting age. You can obviously go older if you want to play as someone who survived the war, but you can also play as someone whose parents were lost in the Great War, getting us away from the parent-child trope that's kind of run its course at this point. This also gives us the freedom to explain if New York was wrecked beyond recognition in the Great War, like it seems, or if that happened after due to something else, something the player can experience. This would be before the Brotherhood were established in any widespread fashion, before the Enclave surfaced, before the NCR existed, and before any super mutants roamed the ruins, giving the game a chance to be its own thing with new factions and enemies. However, if fan service is something they want to exploit, and they probably will, slap power armor or riot gear on the cover and call it good. It doesn't have to be one of these factions, it could just be the armor, because it's pre-war, we can find it in the game. I really like the idea of playing a Fallout game before any of the significant factions came to power, potentially giving us a Fallout game that's separate from everything we know so far, except for one thing, Vault-Tec, and that is who would be my ideal villain in Fallout 5.
But that's simply not possible.
Why isn't it possible?
It's just not.
Why not, you stupid bastard?
I want to face Vault-Tec, and I want there to be an in-game reason as to why they have been so quiet for such a long time, and this game could explain why. We've seen in the show how middle managers, Vault-Tec's workforce, were being held in cryopods until radiation levels were safe enough to go outside. Well, what about a security force, or a Vault-Tec private military, where the general in charge decided that he wanted to wake up early and take control before the directors had the chance to do so? This power-hungry general could be tasked with preparing the wasteland for the managers, but instead of doing that, he kept them on ice and started working towards his own selfish goal. Maybe the new world was such a shock to the general, and his soldiers had so much trouble securing the wasteland, let alone cleansing it, that he woke up another vault, instructing the scientists within to start studying the new mutations, to see if he could make his men more suited to the wasteland. And lo and behold, that's why you were captured and taken to the vault. The same vault the Commander's forces living on Rikers Island invaded because they thought Vault-Tec was creating a top-secret weapon to wipe them out, unintentionally freeing the player and kicking off the main quest. But what is the point of this story? What are you, the player, actually trying to achieve? With Vault-Tec being the source of so much misery, kidnapping countless people and turning them into unwilling test subjects, every faction in New York City wants them gone. I think it's inevitable that you be pulled into the war between the pre-war soldiers, led by the commander, and the new Vault-Tec military, led by the general. Throughout the course of the game, you would help other smaller factions, putting all of their manpower together, as well as putting their differences aside, especially with the Sino-American War ending not that long ago, and ghouls now being a thing, putting all of that behind them and working together for a better future, one without Vault-Tec. And once you have united enough people, the fight against Vault-Tec can begin. It's logical for you to return to the vault to search for any information on Vault-Tec's main base within New York City. You could do this alone, with companions you've picked up along the way, or maybe with certain factions that you've befriended. Either way, you learn where the general is, at the heart of the city, inside a pre-war tower owned by Vault-Tec. New York City is massive though, so getting to the tower is no easy feat. You have to fight through insane survivors, raiders, Chinese remnants still following orders, mutant creatures, and Vault-Tec patrols, maybe going down into the subway to pass the really damaged sections on the surface. After making it to the tower, you face the general at the top, you defeat him, and he decides to use FEV to level up, turning into a horrible abomination that brings the tower down with him, due to the extra weight, or maybe the fight causes the tower to fall, but this puts a stop to the general, who is crushed in the collapse. Of course, this is only half the story, and the next looming threat to take care of is the mutants thriving in the sewers beneath the city. Without Vault-Tec keeping them contained, they surface, and the survivors on the mainland are now fighting a losing battle. New side quests pop up, and you can help the various factions find equipment to repair their defenses, and eventually send them to Rikers to bolster their manpower. And once you've saved a certain number of them, ensuring there's a population worth fighting for, you have to go down into the sewers and stop the mutant threat. Down here you discover two things: a mass grave belonging to the dead test subjects the scientists threw away, unknowingly feeding the mutants and helping them grow their own population, which is primarily made up of the pre-war inhabitants that fled into the sewers to escape the end of the world. And the second thing, a secret vault. Using a keycard you discovered on the General's corpse, the door opens, and inside you learn more about Vault-Tec. And this could be where some of the directors were riding out the apocalypse on ice. Only they're all dead, because the General disconnected their pods and left them to die, putting a major spanner in the works for Vault-Tec. And this could be why we don't really see anyone from Vault-Tec that's important. They're dead. Not sure about the West Coast, but I think we'll be learning about them soon enough. Nevertheless, within this secret vault, you also find the Vault reactor, which you can blow up, destroying the vault, sealing the sewers, and extinguishing the mutants' main source of food, meaning it's only a matter of time until their population declines. But the city is kind of on its last legs at this point. Lots of open craters, towers collapsing, the whole 9 yards, and the only safe haven of sorts is Rikers Island, where any factions you sided with can now be found. And this is why New York is basically a crater. Yes, it was hit by nuclear warheads, but it was a Vault-Tec nuclear reactor that finished it off. And you know, let's say with it being in the sewers, the methane buildup from pre-war bodies caused a chain reaction and made the destruction so much worse than intended.
Oh boy! Oh boy!
This event would explain the absence of Vault-Tec in later games, but leaves the West Coast directors still alive for the show and future games in that region. It doesn't affect any of the existing factions, and the Brotherhood passing through in the 2280s, seeing only mutants, is because they are the only ones capable of living in the city, although their population is now much smaller and not really a threat to the people outside the city. But this would be many, many years later, so who knows what the islanders are actually doing? Did they move location? Did the settlement fall due to ghouls turning feral, something they didn't really know about at the time with it being so soon after the Great War? Or did the Brotherhood simply not see them?
I don't know, man.
With this, we can answer quite a few questions, provide a really fun standalone game that doesn't conflict with existing lore, adding new lore and new experiences, which Fallout desperately needs. And I think we could end the story with the protagonist walking off into the wasteland, becoming a legend, the kind of story that fades away over time, and you could interpret your playthrough as one of the many versions that people tell around campfires. Clearly, this isn't a perfect idea. There's still a lot to work out, other factions, creatures, side quests, different endings, the list goes on. But this was fun. I really enjoyed coming up with this and trying to work with the already established lore while answering some age-old questions. At the end of the day, this is just one possible vision for Fallout's future. Maybe you have a different take, a new angle, or something to add, so let me know what you think in the comments. What are your hopes for the next Fallout game?